Picture this, it's the 16th century and you're strolling through the cobblestone streets of Renaissance Europe, maybe Florence or Paris, feeling like you're in a Shakespearean rom-com. The air smells of fresh bred horse dung and impending doom. You lock eyes with someone across the marketplace, your heart skips a beat and you think, is this love at first sight? But then, a little voice in your head whispers, or is it a death sentence? Welcome to the era when love wasn't just blind, it was potentially lethal thanks to the syphilis epidemic that turned romance into a high-stakes gamble. Imagine swiping right on Tinder, but instead of a bad date, you risk a disease that could make your nose fall off. Yeah, it was that kind of party. In today's video, we're diving into the wild, warty world of the Renaissance syphilis scourge, a time when passion came with a side of paranoia, and a single kiss could send you to an early grave. We'll explore how this disease reshaped Europe, compare it to our modern dating app dilemmas, and maybe even convince you to book that health checkup you've been putting off. Because let's be honest, while we're not dodging syphilis-ridden suitors anymore, we're still navigating our own version of romantic roulette. So grab your coffee or your mead, no judgment, and let's travel back to a time when safe sex meant checking for oozing sores before you got too cozy. Let's set the scene. It's the late 1400s, and Europe is buzzing. The Renaissance is in full swing art music, and ideas are exploding like never before. Michelangelo's chiseling away at statues, explorers are sailing to new worlds, and everyone's feeling a little frisky. But then, out of nowhere, a new player crashes the party: syphilis. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, like a cold sore or a bad Tinder match. Syphilis was the ultimate buzzkill, spreading like wildfire through bedrooms, barracks, and royal courts. Historians think it might have hitched a ride back from the New World with Columbus's crew in 1493, though some argue it was already lurking in Europe, just waiting for its big break. Either way, by the 1500s, it was the talk of the town, and not the good kind. Now imagine you're a young noble in 16th century Venice. You're at a masquerade ball flirting with someone in a feathered mask, thinking you're about to live out your Romeo and Juliet fantasy. But here's the catch: syphilis didn't come with a warning label. It started with a sore or two, easy to shrug off as a minor scratch. Then came the rashes, the fever, the hair loss, and if you were really unlucky, your bones would start to crumble like a poorly built IKEA shelf. The worst part, you might not even know you had it until it was too late, and by then you'd probably passed it on to half the village. Romance wasn't just risky, it was a game of Russian roulette with a side of pustules. What made syphilis so terrifying was how it didn't discriminate. Kings, peasants, priests, and poets, nobody was safe. Even the Pope got caught up in rumors of scandalous sores. It spread through sexual contact, but also through kissing, sharing cups, or even nursing babies. People were so paranoid they started avoiding handshakes, like we avoid spoilers for the latest Netflix series. And the treatments. Oh, they were as bad as the disease. Doctors prescribed mercury, yes, the toxic metal which you'd rub on your skin or inhale as vapor. Sure, it might kill the syphilis, but it could also kill you. Teeth fell out, tongues turned black, and some patients went mad before they got better. It was like choosing between a punch to the face or a kick to the stomach. But here's where it gets juicy: syphilis didn't just mess with people's bodies, it messed with their minds. The Renaissance was all about love and beauty. Think Petrarch writing sonnets about Laura's perfect eyes. Suddenly though, every flirtatious glance came with a mental checklist. Does this person look too pale? Are they scratching a lot? Courtship turned into a detective game, with everyone side-eyeing their suitors like they were auditioning for a true crime podcast. And forget about casual hookups, people started marrying faster just to avoid the syphilis lottery. It was the ultimate wingman for commitment, but for all the wrong reasons. Now let's fast forward to today. You're swiping through Tinder, Bumble, or whatever app promises to find your soulmate by next Thursday. Sure, we've got modern medicine, antibiotics, condoms, and STI testing that doesn't involve sniffing mercury fumes, but are we really that different from our Renaissance ancestors? Back then, they were dodging syphilis in dimly lit taverns. Today, we're dodging ghosters and catfishes in the digital jungle. The stakes might be lower, no one's losing their nose to a bad date anymore. But the paranoia, oh, it's still there. Every time you match with someone new, there's that tiny voice asking, are they who they say they are? Are they hiding something? Like a weird rash. The Renaissance folks didn't have WebMD to spiral over their symptoms, but they had their own version gossip. Word spread faster than the disease itself. If someone in town started looking a bit off, the rumor mill churned out stories of their scandalous affairs faster than you can say viral tweet. Today we've got group chats and Reddit threads to do the same job. Someone ghosts you after one date. Your friends are already analyzing their profile like it's a crime scene. Did you see their bio? Loves adventure and late night tacos sounds like a red flag to me. But here's the kicker, syphilis didn't just change how people dated, it changed society. It forced people to think about public health in a way they never had before. Cities started cracking down on brothels, churches preached abstinence like it was going out of style, and doctors began studying diseases more seriously. It was a wake-up call that made people realize intimacy wasn't just about passion, it was about survival. Sound familiar? Today we've got campaigns about safe sex consent and regular testing, but we're still learning to balance desire with caution. The Renaissance was the OG era of swipe carefully. So what's the takeaway from this Renaissance romance nightmare? Well, for one, be glad you're living in 2025, where a trip to the doctor can fix most things that ail you. But more importantly, it's a reminder that love has always been a bit of a gamble. Back then, you risked your life for a fling. Today, you might just risk a broken heart or an awkward morning after. The question is, how do we navigate this game without losing our heads or our noses? Stick around because we're about to dive deeper into how syphilis turned Europe upside down and what it taught us about love, lust, and not being a total idiot when it comes to our health. Alright, so we've set the stage, it's the Renaissance, and syphilis is crashing the party like an uninvited guest who drinks all your wine and leaves a mess. Europe's in chaos, love is a minefield, and everyone's wondering if that cute stranger at the tavern is worth the risk of a lifetime of mercury treatments. But how did this disease turn an era of art and romance into a full-blown paranoia fest? And what does it have to do with your latest Tinder match? Let's dive deeper into the syphilis scourge and unpack how it rewrote the rules of love, health, and survival, while tossing in a few lessons our swipe-happy selves could stand to learn. Picture yourself in 1500s Europe. The streets are alive with merchants hawking spices, artists sketching in the town square, and musicians strumming lutes like they're auditioning for a medieval boy band. But beneath the glamour, syphilis is spreading faster than a viral TikTok. Historians call it the Great Pox to distinguish it from smallpox because apparently they needed a catchy name for something that made your skin look like a bad Renaissance painting. The disease hit hard and fast, with estimates suggesting up to a third of some urban populations were infected by the early 1500s. That's right, 1 in 3 people you met might have been carrying the 16th century equivalent of a biohazard sign. What made syphilis so brutal wasn't just its symptoms though, those were horrific enough. It came in stages like a villain with a flair for drama. Stage 1, a painless sore, easily ignored like a mosquito bite you don't notice until it's too late. Stage 2, rashes, fever, and hair loss that made you look like you'd lost a fight with a lawnmower. If you survived that stage, 3 could hit years later, eating away at your bones, brain, and sanity. Imagine ghosting someone only to find out a decade later that your one-night stand turned you into a medical horror story. No wonder people were freaking out. The real kicker, nobody knew how to stop it. Doctors back then weren't exactly Googling syphilis cure. Their best guess was that it was caused by bad air or divine punishment for being too frisky. Some blamed witches because of course they did. Others pointed fingers at foreigners. Italian doctors called it the French disease. The French called it the Italian disease, and everyone agreed it was someone else's fault. Sound familiar? We're still quick to blame others when things go wrong, whether it's a bad date or a global crisis. But back then, the blame game didn't help. Syphilis didn't care about your nationality or your morals. It was an equal opportunity nightmare. So how did people cope? Well, they didn't really. The treatments were as wild as the disease itself. Mercury was the go-to cure, but calling it that is like calling a sledgehammer a precision tool. Patients would slather mercury ointment on their sores, or sit in steam baths inhaling its vapors, hoping to sweat out the disease. The result? Often they'd lose their teeth, their hair, or their grip on reality before the syphilis even had a chance to finish them off. One popular saying was, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." Romantic, right? It's like saying swipe right today, regret it for the next 20 years. But it wasn't just the physical toll that made syphilis a game changer, it messed with society's headspace in a big way. The Renaissance was all about celebrating the human body. Think Botticelli's Birth of Venus, all glowing skin and flowing hair. Suddenly though, bodies weren't so glamorous. People started covering up literally and figuratively. Modesty became a survival tactic, not just a fashion statement. Women draped themselves in layers of fabric, and men grew beards to hide suspicious sores. Dating turned into a high-stakes investigation, with everyone playing Sherlock Holmes looking for telltale signs of the pox. Nice smile, but is that a rash under your doublet? This paranoia reshaped relationships. Marriage rates spiked as people tried to lock down safe partners before things got too risky. Courting became less about poetry and more about vetting your suitor's medical history. Parents grilled potential spouses like they were applying for a job at the royal court. Any unexplained fevers, bald patches, sudden nosebleeds. It was less love at first sight and more love after a thorough inspection. Compare that to today, where we're scrolling through profiles trying to figure out if loves hiking means owns 12 cats and never showers. The stakes have changed, but the detective work not so much. The church didn't help calm the panic. Priests thundered from pulpits that syphilis was God's wrath for humanity's naughty behavior. Brothels were shut down, and sinful activities like dancing or kissing in public were frowned upon. It was the ultimate buzzkill for a culture that was just starting to loosen up. But it also sparked a shift in how people thought about health. Cities began enforcing quarantine measures, hospitals popped up to isolate the infected, and doctors started asking questions about how diseases actually spread. It was the Renaissance's first stab at public health, even if it was less science and more let's lock everyone up and hope for the best. Now let's zoom back to 2025. We're not dodging the great pox, but we're still navigating our own health minefields. Dating apps have made hooking up easier than ever, but they've also made us hyper aware of risks. We've got STI testing vaccines and apps that remind you to get checked, but we're still human prone to bad decisions and late night swipes we regret. The Renaissance taught us that ignoring risks doesn't make them go away. Back then, people learned the hard way that a moment of passion could cost you everything. Today, we've got the tools to stay safe, but we still need the brains to use them. Ever skipped a health checkup because it's probably fine? Yeah, your 16th century self would like a word. Syphilis also left a mark on culture that we're still feeling today. It inspired artists and writers to get dark and moody. Think of all those gloomy paintings of skulls and decaying flesh. It was like the Renaissance version of an emo playlist. Even Shakespeare got in on the action-tossing syphilis references into his plays like they were spicy gossip. Fast forward to now, and we're still obsessed with turning our fears into art, whether it's dystopian movies or TikToks about dating disasters. The human condition hasn't changed much. We're still wrestling with desire, danger, and the hope that love won't screw us over. So what can we learn from this syphilis-soaked chapter of history? For one, it's a reminder that our ancestors were tougher than we give them credit for. They faced a disease with no cure, no real understanding, and treatments that were basically poison, and they still managed to keep the human race going. But it also shows us how fear can shape behavior for better or worse. The Renaissance folks tightened up their morals and started thinking about health in new ways. Today we've got the luxury of science, but we're still learning to balance freedom with responsibility. If you could time travel back to 1500 and tell them about antibiotics, they'd probably trade their best horse for a single dose. Here's a question to chew on. If you were a Renaissance lover, would you risk it all for a forbidden kiss knowing the stakes? Or would you play it safe and stick to writing sonnets from a distance? Better yet, how's your modern dating game holding up? Are you dodging red flags or just hoping for the best? The syphilis epidemic taught us that love's always been a gamble, but it's how we handle the risks that matters. Stick with me because next we're gonna see how this disease didn't just break hearts, it changed the world and maybe even set the stage for our modern obsession with swiping safely. So we've been wading through the Renaissance muck where syphilis turned every flirtatious glance into a potential death warrant. We've seen how the Great Pox made Europe's romantics sweat not just from passion, but from sheer terror, and how mercury cures were about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. But this epidemic didn't just ruin date nights, it reshaped society, culture, and even the way people thought about trust and intimacy. And here's the wild part, the echoes of that paranoia are still bouncing around in our modern dating apps and health-conscious world. Let's dive into how syphilis shook up the Renaissance and why it's got more in common with your latest Bumble match than you might think. Let's rewind to the 1500s again. Syphilis is tearing through Europe like a bad rumor on X, and people are starting to realize this isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal dumpster fire. Cities like Venice and Paris, once buzzing with free-spirited Renaissance vibes, are now ground zero for panic. The disease is so widespread that it's not just lovers who are worried, entire communities are on edge. Imagine a town meeting where everyone's whispering, "Did you hear about Giovanni? He's got the pox." It's like a medieval version of a group chat blowing up with tea. But instead of canceling someone online, they're getting shunned IRL, or worse, sent to a hospital that's basically a plague ward with extra leeches. This fear led to some big changes. For starters, governments started meddling in people's love lives like never before. Cities passed laws to crack down on brothels, which were seen as syphilis superspreader events. In some places, sex workers were rounded up, branded, or banished because nothing says public health like scapegoating the vulnerable. Meanwhile, the church was having a field day preaching that the pox was God's way of saying knock it off with the hanky-panky. Sermons turned into anti-sex PSAs urging people to stay chaste, or at least stick to one partner. It was like the Renaissance version of just say no, but with more guilt and fewer catchy slogans. These crackdowns didn't just change behavior, they changed how people saw each other. Trust became a rare commodity. Back then, you couldn't just ask someone for their STI test results before a date. There was no such thing, so people got creative. They'd scrutinize their suitors for signs of the pox, a limp, a weird rash, or a nose that looked like it was auditioning for a horror movie. It was like playing Spot the Red Flag, but the stakes were life and death. Compare that to today, where we're Googling our dates or stalking their Instagram to make sure they're not a catfish or a crypto bro. The tools have changed, but the vibe, still suspicious. Syphilis also forced a rethink of medicine itself. Renaissance doctors were basically glorified barbers with a side hustle and bloodletting, but the epidemic pushed them to get serious. They started documenting symptoms, tracking how the disease spread, and debating whether it was really bad air or something else. Spoiler, they didn't figure out it was a bacteria until centuries later, but they laid the groundwork for modern epidemiology. Hospitals began isolating syphilis patients, and some cities even set up early versions of contact tracing. Think less app notification and more guy with a quill writing down who you smooched last week. It was messy, but it was progress. Culturally, syphilis left a mark deeper than a pox sore. The Renaissance was all about celebrating beauty and passion, but this disease made people confront the darker side of human desire. Artists started painting memento mori skulls and wilting flowers to remind everyone that life and love was fleeting. Writers like Shakespeare slipped syphilis references into their works, using it as a metaphor for betrayal or moral decay. In Measure for Measure, characters toss around jabs about the French disease like it's a punchline, but you can feel the anxiety behind the words. It's not unlike how we use humor today to cope with our own fears. Think of all the memes about bad dates or pandemic dating. We laugh because deep down, we're all a little scared of getting burned. Now, let's talk about the long game. The syphilis epidemic didn't just fizzle out, it forced Europe to grow up. By the 1600s, the disease was less of a death sentence, partly because people got better at avoiding it, monogamy became a hot trend, and partly because the bacteria itself might have mellowed out, but the lessons stuck. Public health became a thing, cities invested in sanitation, doctors got less obsessed with humors and more into observation, and people started valuing prevention over cure. It was like the Renaissance saying, okay, we messed up, but let's not do that again. Fast forward to 2025, and we're living in the shadow of those changes. Dating apps like Tinder or Hinge have made romance as easy as ordering takeout, but they've also brought new risks. We're not worried about our noses falling off anymore, thank you antibiotics, but we're still navigating trust issues. Ever hesitated before meeting someone because their profile seemed too perfect? Or wondered if that flu they mentioned was something else? That's the Renaissance paranoia in a modern skin. We've got better tools, condoms, vaccines, and clinics that don't involve mercury baths, but we're still human prone to ignoring red flags when the chemistry's good. The syphilis scourge also reminds us how fragile progress can be. Back then, people thought they were living in a golden age until a tiny microbe turned their world upside down. Today, we're spoiled with medical miracles, but we're not invincible. STIs like chlamydia or HPV are still out there, and while they're treatable, they're a reminder to stay sharp. The Renaissance folks didn't have WebMD or Planned Parenthood, but they learned to adapt. We've got no excuse, regular checkups, honest convos with partners, and a little common sense go a long way. It's like updating your phone. Nobody wants to do it, but it keeps things running smoothly. Here's a thought to ponder if you could send a message back to those Renaissance romantics. What would you tell them? Yo, chill on the mercury and maybe try soap. Or would you warn them that love's always going to be a gamble no matter the century? And while we're at it, how's your own risk radar holding up? Are you playing it safe in the dating game, or are you rolling the dice like a 16th century poet chasing a muse? The syphilis epidemic showed us that love can change the world for better or worse. Next, we'll wrap this up with a look at how those lessons still hit home and why appreciating modern medicine might just save your love life. Alright, we've journeyed through the Renaissance, where syphilis turned love into a game of spin the bottle, lose your nose. We've laughed at the mercury treatments that were more poison than cure, cringed at the paranoia that made every flirt a suspect, and marveled at how a tiny microbe reshaped society. Now it's time to tie this all together. Reflect on what those pox-riddled days mean for us in 2025, and maybe convince you to schedule that health checkup you've been ghosting. Because if the Renaissance taught us anything, it's that love's a gamble, but you don't have to bet your life on it. Let's wrap this up with a look at the big picture, some hard-earned lessons, and a nudge to keep swiping smart. Let's do a quick rewind. The syphilis epidemic of the 16th century wasn't just a medical crisis, it was a cultural earthquake. It turned romance into a high-stakes detective game, forced cities to rethink public health, and made artists and writers get all moody with their skull paintings and disease metaphors. People learned to adapt, whether it was locking down a spouse to avoid the pox lottery, or building hospitals to keep the infected from spreading the love and the sores. It was messy, it was scary, but it pushed humanity to get smarter about health and survival. And honestly, that's not so different from the challenges we face today, even if our biggest worry is a bad Tinder date or a sketchy Venmo request. So what's the big takeaway from this Renaissance soap opera? First, let's give a round of applause to modern medicine. Back then, a sore could mean game over. Today, a quick trip to the clinic can sort most things out faster than you can delete a bad Hinge match. Antibiotics, vaccines, and STI testing have turned potential death sentences into manageable hiccups. But here's the catch, having the tools doesn't mean we always use them. Think about it, when was the last time you got a full health checkup? Or had an honest chat with a partner about testing? If you're squirming right now, don't worry, your Renaissance ancestors would totally get it. They ignored sores until their teeth fell out, so we're already doing better than that. The syphilis scourge also reminds us that humans are slow learners, but stubborn survivors. Back in the 1500s, people didn't have WebMD or CDC guidelines, yet they figured out ways to cope, cracking down on brothels, preaching abstinence, or just growing beards to hide the evidence. Today we've got apps that track our health campaigns, that preach safe sex, and enough information to make smarter choices. But we're still human, which means we're prone to swiping right on someone with lives for chaos in their bio and hoping for the best. The Renaissance showed us that survival means balancing desire with caution, whether you're dodging a pox or a red flag. Let's get real for a second. Dating in 2025 isn't a death sentence, but it's still a jungle. Apps like Tinder or Bumble make it easy to meet someone new, but they also amplify our old friend paranoia. Is that charming stranger ghosting you because they're busy, or because they're hiding something? Are you overthinking their "I'm not feeling well"? The syphilis epidemic taught us that trust is hard won, and it starts with being proactive. Get tested regularly, use protection, and don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. It's not as romantic as a candlelit dinner, but it's a lot sexier than a trip to the ER. Here's where it gets deep. The Renaissance wasn't just about surviving syphilis, it was about learning to live with uncertainty. Those folks didn't know when the next plague would hit or if their next kiss would be their last. Yet they kept painting, writing, and falling in love because that's what humans do. We push forward. Today, we face our own uncertainties, climate change, tech overload, or just figuring out if you up is a vibe or a trap. The lesson: adapt, stay informed, and don't let fear stop you from living. Your Renaissance self would be proud every time you make a smart choice, like using a condom or deleting that shady match who asked for your bank details. So what can we steal from our pox-plagued ancestors to make our modern lives better? First, appreciate the heck out of science. We're living in an age where a quick pill can fix what used to be a death sentence, so let's not take that for granted. Second, trust, but verify. Love is awesome, but a little detective work, whether it's a health check or a Google search, never hurt anybody. And finally, keep laughing. The Renaissance folks faced a nightmare with no cure, yet they still wrote poetry and threw parties. We've got no excuse to let a bad date or a health scare keep us down. Now, here's something to chew on. If you could go back and live in the Renaissance, would you take the risk of a syphilis-ridden romance, or would you play it safe and stick to penning love letters? And more importantly, how are you handling the risks in your own dating life? Are you swiping with your brain or just your heart? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear how you're navigating the modern love jungle, and maybe share a horror story or two about your worst date. No judgment, we've all been there. If this deep dive into the syphilis scourge got your brain buzzing, check out our video on the Black Death when plague ruled Europe for another wild ride through history's darkest moments. It's got all the drama minus the mercury fumes. And while you're here, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that make you laugh, think, and maybe double check your dating app settings. We're all about unearthing the past to make sense of the present, and we'd love for you to join the journey. Thank you for hanging out with us through this pox-filled adventure. It's been a blast peeling back the layers of history to see how love, lust, and a little bacteria shape the world. Stay safe out there, keep your heart open, but your health in check, and we'll see you in the next video for another wild trip through time. Until then, swipe smart and stay awesome.